Research Station Echo 7, orbiting an unremarkable star in the Idris system. Year 3147. C. The soft, rhythmic humming of the station's environmental systems provided a constant backdrop to life aboard Echo 7. From her laboratory window, Dr. Aria Voss could see the distant star, unremarkable by astronomical standards, but fascinating in its own quiet way. Much like the microbes she spent her days studying. The view often made her feel small, yet significant, isolated, yet connected to something greater. It was during these moments of contemplation that she found herself most at peace. Dr. Voss, your protein cultures in Lab B require attention, announced S7, the station's artificial intelligence, its voice calibrated to sound vaguely maternal, yet authoritative. Aria sighed, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Thanks. S7. And the coffee synthesizer? Still experiencing temperamental issues. S7 replied with what might have been a digital hesitation. It appears to be producing liquid that is technically coffee, but exhibits properties more consistent with industrial lubricant. Wonderful, Aria muttered, gathering her datapad and heading toward the corridor. That'll be the third recalibration this month. I swear that machine has developed sentience, spiteful sentience. An interesting hypothesis. S7 responded, though unlikely given its limited processing capabilities. The corridors of Echo 7 were designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Clean lines, recycled metal, and lighting that attempted to mimic Earth's natural daylight cycles, but never quite succeeded. 43 scientists and 16 support staff called this metal box home, all dedicated to cataloging and studying the diverse ecosystems found on nearby moons and planets. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important. Expanding humanity's understanding of the universe, one microscopic organism at a time. As she entered Lab B, Aria nodded to Dr. Martinez, her research partner of 3 years. He was hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sectoid samples are showing unusual mitotic patterns, he said without looking up. Almost as if they're responding to the presence of the Cygnus bacteria, though they're separated by containment fields. Quantum entanglement at a cellular level, Aria suggested, sliding into her workstation and calling up the relevant data. We've seen hints of it before in the Proxima specimens. Possibly, but that would suggest. Their conversation dissolved into the comfortable shorthand of long-time collaborators. A dance of hypotheses and observations punctuated by the occasional dry joke about microbial mating habits. This was Aria's world, methodical, ordered, and safely distant from the political complexities that plagued the colonized systems. Echo 7 existed in a precarious neutral zone, its scientific mission protected by treaties that were honored more often than not. The station's defensive systems had last been serviced under 3 administrations ago. As Chief Engineer Kawasaki liked to joke, they monitored standard distress frequencies, but rarely heard anything beyond routine commercial traffic. Perhaps that was why the alarm, when it finally came, seemed so surreal. Unknown vessels approaching, S7 announced, its voice shifting to emergency protocols. Designation: non-commercial. Configuration matches known pirate vessels. All personnel to security stations. Aria looked up from her microscope, momentarily frozen. The facility drills hadn't prepared them for actual combat situations. They were researchers, not soldiers. Martinez, she said, finding her voice. Secure the samples. Priority 1 materials to the vault. He nodded, already moving with surprising efficiency. Scientists protected their work with parental ferocity. The observation deck offered the best visual of what was happening outside the station's protective hull. Arya arrived just in time to see 3 sleek frigates approaching, their hulls adorned with the unmistakable sigils of deep space raiders. Their engines burned hot and predatory against the blackness. "They're matching our orbit," whispered Technician Wong beside her. "Preparing to board, most likely." "Why us?" Arya asked, though she knew the answer. Scientific outposts carried valuable biological specimens, advanced technology, and most importantly, were typically defended by little more than automated systems and a handful of security officers with basic training. Before Wong could respond, space itself seemed to tear open approximately 10,000 kilometers from the station. The fabric of reality shimmered and parted as 3 massive vessels emerged from warp, their hulls the deep crimson of arterial blood, adorned with the geometric patterns that everyone in colonized space recognized with equal parts relief and dread. The hegemony had arrived. No one spoke as the crimson warships moved with deadly grace, positioning themselves between Echo 7 and the pirate vessels. There was no communication, no warning, just the sudden flare of weapon systems engaging. The pirate ships, recognizing the futility of their position, attempted evasive maneuvers. But the hegemony cruisers moved with uncanny precision. It was over in seconds, where 3 pirate vessels had been. Now drifted only scattered debris. "Attention Research Station Echo 7. A voice rumbled through the station's communication system. It was deep, gravelly, with the distinct harmonic undertones of hegemony physiology. "This is Commander Thra of the Hegemony Enforcement Vessel Indomitable. The threat has been neutralized. Prepare for boarding and inspection. Any resistance will be interpreted as hostile intent." The observation deck fell silent. The hegemony, a coalition of 7 apex predator species that had collectively dominated known space for over 3 millennia, were not known for their gentle approach to inspection. They maintained order across the colonized systems with ruthless efficiency, allowing various species to govern themselves so long as they acknowledged hegemony supremacy and followed their core doctrines. "Standard protocol," Station Director Okafor announced over the internal comm system, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "All personnel continue essential operations only. Security team to main airlock. Remember, we have nothing to hide, and valid treaties protecting our research." Arya returned to her lab, hands trembling slightly as she secured sensitive specimens. Through the lab window, she watched the Crimson Shuttle detach from the largest warship and approach Echo 7's docking bay. "What do you think they want?" Martinez asked, voice hushed despite being alone in the lab with Arya. "Probably just asserting dominance," she replied, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "Pirates have been more active in this sector lately. The hegemony occasionally makes examples." The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps in the corridor silenced their conversation. Arya straightened her lab coat instinctively as the lab door slid open. 3 hegemony soldiers entered, their armor a seamless extension of their already imposing physiology. The species, Arya recognized them as Thraxians, the same as Commander Thra, stood nearly 7 feet tall, with exoskeletons that gleamed dully under the lab lights. Their sensory organs, clusters of photoreceptors that glowed faintly green, scanned the room methodically. "Continue your work," the lead soldier commanded, the translator device at its throat, converting complex harmonic vocalizations into standard English. Commander Thra inspects vital sections personally. Arya nodded and returned to her microscope, though her focus was entirely on the armored figures moving around her laboratory. They examined equipment with surprising delicacy, given their formidable claws, occasionally marking something on data devices integrated into their armor, Xenobiological research, one noted, examining the specimen containers. Classification? Primarily microbial studies, Aria answered, finding her professional voice. Single-cell organisms from the moons of Idris IV, no weapons applications, all documented in accordance with Treaty of Proxima regulations. The soldier made a sound that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal before moving on. Aria allowed herself a small breath of relief. The inspection continued for nearly an hour, the tension in the room thick enough to culture bacteria in. When the alarm sounded again, it was almost a relief, until Aria registered the unique pattern. Not just unknown vessels. Hostile boarding action in progress. Security breach in Docking Bay 3, S7's voice announced. Multiple hostile entities detected. Hegemony forces engaging. The lead soldier's posture shifted instantly from inspection to combat readiness. Station personnel, secure yourselves. This area will be locked down. The lab door sealed with a decisive hiss as the hegemony soldiers exited, leaving Aria and Martinez exchanging looks of disbelief. A second pirate group? Martinez whispered. While the hegemony is already here, that's either incredible bravery or incredible stupidity. Or desperation, Aria suggested. Whatever they're after must be worth the risk. The sounds of battle reached them even through the sealed lab, the distinctive whine of energy weapons, the deeper thrum of hegemony armor systems, and occasionally, distressingly, the sound of something heavy impacting metal walls. S7 kept them updated through the station's communication system. Multiple breaches detected, hostile forces estimated at 27 individuals, hegemony forces engaging at all points, station damage at 12% and rising. Hours passed in tense silence. Aria and Martinez divided their time between securing their most valuable research and monitoring the station's internal sensors for any approaching danger. The battle seemed to move throughout the station in waves, concentrating in the command center, then the engineering section, and finally approaching the research wing. They're after something specific, Aria noted as she watched the security feed. This isn't random looting. The feed abruptly cut out as a massive explosion rocked their section of the station. The lights flickered, emergency systems engaging as the environmental controls momentarily faltered. Hull breach contained in Section C, S7 reported. Life support stable but compromised. All personnel evacuate research wing immediately. We can't leave the samples, Martinez protested, already gathering preservation containers. Martinez, there's no time, Aria began, but was interrupted by the sound of the lab door's emergency override engaging. The door slid open to reveal chaos. The corridor was filled with smoke and the flickering red of emergency lighting. And there, collapsed against the opposite wall, was a hegemony soldier, armor cracked and leaking a luminescent green fluid that Aria recognized as Thraxian hemolymph. Despite the damage to the armor, she recognized the distinctive markings of command rank. Commander Thra himself lay dying in front of her laboratory. Dr. Martinez, go, she said. Decision made in an instant. Get to the evacuation pods with the priority samples. What about you? He asked, already loading specimen containers into a portable stasis unit. I'll be right behind you, she lied, moving toward the fallen commander. Just need to secure a few more things. Martinez hesitated only briefly before nodding and disappearing down the corridor toward the emergency evacuation routes. Aria approached the wounded hegemony commander cautiously. Thraxian biology was known to include defensive mechanisms that could activate even when unconscious. Up close, the damage was even more severe than she'd initially assessed. The commander's exoskeletal armor was shattered in multiple places, exposing the more vulnerable tissues beneath. Green fluid pulsed from at least 3 major wounds. Station protocol was clear. Non-medical personnel were forbidden from attempting treatment of alien species without proper training and equipment. The risks of unintentional harm or diplomatic incidents were too great. But as she studied the commander's failing life signs on her medical scanner, another imperative asserted itself: the oath she'd taken as a scientist, dedicated to preserving life in all its forms. "Commander Thra," she said loudly, hoping the translator was still functioning. "Can you hear me?" The cluster of optical receptors flickered weakly, a sign of consciousness. The translator emitted a burst of static before managing, "Station. Secure primary objective." "You're severely wounded," Arya continued, running her scanner over the most critical injuries. "I'm Dr. Arya Voss, xenobiologist. I can help you, but I need your consent." The commander's massive form shuddered, mandibles clicking in what might have been pain or denial. "Assistance. Required. Complete mission." Arya made her decision. "I'm going to help you regardless. Hegemony doctrine allows for medical intervention in critical cases. Article 17 of the Rigel Conventions." She was stretching the truth of interstellar law, but the commander was in no condition to argue the finer points of treaty clauses. Moving quickly, she returned to the lab and gathered everything she could think of that might help. Medical kits designed for human physiology, engineering bonding agents used for specimen containers, synthetic growth mediums, and a portable molecular scanner. By the time she returned to the corridor, the commander's vital signs had weakened further. In the distance, she could hear the continued sounds of battle. The pirates hadn't yet been subdued, despite the hegemony's fearsome reputation. "S7, she called out. "I need information on Thraxian physiology, specifically circulatory and respiratory systems." "Accessing xenobiological database," the AI responded. "Warning. Treating hegemony personnel without certification violates station protocols and potentially 17 different treaty clauses." "Note my objection and proceed," Arya said, already using a laser scalpel to carefully remove the damaged sections of exoskeleton. "Thraxian circulatory system includes 3 primary hemolymph channels." S7 began reciting. "Respiratory function is maintained through spiracles located at junctures of major exoskeletal plates. Critical vulnerabilities include—" "Just the healing part." "S7, Arya interrupted, hands steady despite the circumstances. "How do I keep this one alive?" What followed was the most intense 4 hours of Arya's life. The commander drifted in and out of consciousness as she worked, occasionally uttering commands to troops no longer present or fragments of hegemony battle doctrine. The pirate attack continued elsewhere on the station, but Arya's world narrowed to the precise movements required to save a life fundamentally different from her own. She used molecular sealants designed for preserving microscopic organisms to close ruptured vessels. She crafted synthetic scaffolds from laboratory polymers to support shattered ribs. She jury-rigged a circulatory support system using nutrient perfusion techniques borrowed from her microbiological research. Each failure brought the commander closer to death. Each small success bought precious minutes. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she worked, ignoring the periodic announcements about the battle's progress through the station. "Hemolymph pressure stabilizing," she muttered to herself after the 3rd hour, checking the makeshift monitoring system she'd assembled. Respiratory efficiency at 28%. Not great, but better than the 16% we started with. The commander's optical receptors flickered more strongly now, focusing on her with greater clarity. The translator crackled to life. "Why? Attempt this. Success. Improbable." Arya didn't look up from sealing another damaged vessel. "Because you were dying. Because I could help. Because mercy isn't a weakness. It's the entire point of civilization." The commander fell silent, though whether from disagreement or the need to conserve strength, Arya couldn't tell. She continued working, applying techniques designed for microscopic organisms to a patient orders of magnitude larger, adapting and innovating with each passing minute. By the 4th hour, she had done everything possible with the limited resources available. The commander's condition had stabilized, not healed, but no longer actively deteriorating. Arya sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of the silence that had fallen over the station. S7, status report, she requested, realizing she'd been oblivious to station communications while focused on her patient. Pirate forces neutralized. The AI responded. Hegemony reinforcements arrived 23 minutes ago. Station damage at 37% but stable. No casualties among research personnel. Security reports 3 casualties among station security forces. Hegemony forces sustained significant casualties. 7 confirmed dead, 4 wounded. And Commander Thra has been missing in action for over 4 hours, Arya added, looking down at her patient. Correct. S7 confirmed. Hegemony search parties are systematically moving through the station. They will reach your position in approximately 12 minutes. The commander's optical receptors focused on Arya with renewed intensity. You saved me. Against protocol. Yes, she admitted. I'd do it again. Why? The question was simple, but loaded with the weight of cultural incomprehension. Arya considered her answer carefully. The hegemony's entire civilization was built on principles of strength, conquest, and transaction. Mercy was viewed as weakness, altruism as naivete. How could she explain an ethical framework so fundamentally different? Because life has inherent value, she said finally. Because compassion isn't conditional on reward or recognition. Because in my culture, we believe that how we treat others, especially those different from us, defines who we are. The commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been skepticism. Inefficient. Dangerous. Perhaps, Arya conceded, but it's who we are at our best. The sound of approaching footsteps, the distinctive heavy rhythm of hegemony soldiers, ended their philosophical discussion. 3 armored figures appeared at the end of the corridor, weapons raised until they recognized their commander. Command unit located. One reported into a communication device. Medical situation. Dispatch medical transport immediately. Within minutes, the corridor was filled with hegemony personnel. Arya found herself pushed aside as specialized medical technicians took over, transferring the commander to a hovering transport bed, equipped with advanced life support systems. She provided a detailed account of the treatments she'd administered, watching as the hegemony medic's posture shifted from dismissive to reluctantly impressed. Unorthodox methods, one commented, examining the molecular sealants, but effective given the limitations. Commander Thra raised one damaged limb, silencing the medical team. The translator rendered his words clearly. This human preserved my life using minimal resources and prohibited knowledge. Note this in the official record. The statement had the weight of formal declaration, though Arya didn't fully understand its significance at the time. The hegemony forces departed shortly after, taking their wounded with them. The pirates, those who had survived, were taken as prisoners, their fate determined by hegemony justice rather than human law. In the days that followed, Echo 7 began its recovery process. Damaged sections were sealed off. Repair crews worked continuously, and research slowly resumed. Arya returned to her laboratory, cataloging the samples that had survived and mourning those lost in the attack. It was 3 days after the incident when Director Okafor called Arya to the communications center. We've received a transmission from Hegemony Command, Okafor explained, her expression unreadable. Specifically regarding you, Dr. Voss. Arya felt a chill run through her. Interfering with a hegemony commander, even to save their life, could be interpreted as a violation of their strict protocols. She'd been so focused on the immediate medical needs that she hadn't fully considered the potential diplomatic repercussions. "They want to speak with me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No," Okafor replied. "They've issued a directive, an unprecedented one, according to our diplomatic advisors." The director activated the main view screen, displaying a formal document bearing the geometric sigils of Hegemony High Command. Arya's eyes widened as she read the opening declaration. By order of the Hegemony Council of Seven, in recognition of services rendered to Commander First Rank Thra of House Dominant, no soldier, officer, or agent of the Hegemony shall, under penalty of immediate execution, raise weapon or threat against Dr. Arya Voss of Research Station Echo 7, regardless of circumstance or provocation. Arya read the document twice, unable to fully process its implications. I don't understand." "It's a protection order," Okafor explained. "The most comprehensive our diplomatic team has ever seen. You've been granted immunity from hegemony action. Personal, permanent immunity." "Because I saved Commander Thra's life?" "Apparently," Okafor said with a hint of amazement. "The commander made a formal declaration of life debt. It's an ancient practice, rarely invoked, and never before extended to a non-hegemony species." In the weeks that followed, the full implications of this unprecedented protection became increasingly apparent. Echo 7 received a steady stream of confused diplomatic communiques as word spread through nearby systems. Smugglers rerouted their operations away from the Idris system, unwilling to risk even the possibility of encountering someone under hegemony protection. Colonial governors sent cautious inquiries about opening dialogue with the human who tamed the predators. Trading posts throughout 3 sectors posted bulletins advising captains to extend all courtesy to representatives of Research Station Echo 7, and, under no circumstances, engage in hostile action near Idris. The protection order had created ripples that extended far beyond Arya herself. Through it all, Arya attempted to maintain her normal routine, continuing her research, arguing with the still temperamental coffee synthesizer, and trying to ignore her sudden notoriety. S7, with its dry mechanical humor, took to announcing the untouchable one approaches whenever she entered the laboratory. 6 months after the incident, Echo 7 received another hegemony visitor. This time, there was no battle, no emergency, just a single Crimson shuttle requesting permission to dock for a scheduled diplomatic exchange. Arya was summoned to the meeting room, where she found Commander Thra waiting. His exoskeleton showed the unmistakable patterns of regrowth where she had treated his wounds. The new section slightly lighter in color than the surrounding armor. "Dr. Voss," he greeted her, the translator rendering his voice with the same gravelly quality she remembered. "Commander Thra," she replied with a formal nod. "I'm pleased to see you've recovered." "Due to your intervention," he acknowledged. "I have studied your methods since then. They should not have succeeded." Arya smiled slightly. Sometimes improvisation yields unexpected results. Indeed. The commander's optical receptors adjusted, focusing intently on her. "Your actions have created complications within the hegemony." "I've heard rumors," she admitted. "That wasn't my intention." "Intention is irrelevant. Consequence is reality." The commander made a gesture that her xenocultural training identified as indicating thoughtful consideration. "Many question why a predator of my rank would declare life debt to a prey species. Some see weakness, others see opportunity." "And what do you see, Commander?" Arya asked quietly. "Evolution," he replied after a moment. "The strongest adaptations often come from unexpected sources. My life debt to you has created a precedent. 3 other commanders have since recognized life debts to non-hegemony individuals who rendered critical assistance. Arya felt a moment of vertigo as she considered the implications. The hegemony had dominated space for 3 millennia through unwavering adherence to its doctrine of strength. A crack had formed in that monolithic system, a crack that began with her decision to save a dying predator. The Council debates whether this represents corruption or advancement. Thra continued, "Until they decide, I maintain my obligation. My personal fleet will remain stationed near Idris to ensure your protection." "That's not necessary," Arya protested. "Your formal declaration is enough." "It is necessary," the commander insisted. "Not merely to fulfill my obligation, but to make visible this new possibility. That mercy can coexist with strength. That debt can bind across species boundaries." After the commander's departure, Arya returned to her laboratory. Through the viewport, she could see the Crimson Cruiser maintaining position at a respectful distance from Echo 7, an honor guard that had not been requested but would not be refused. She turned back to her microscope, adjusting the focus to observe the interaction between 2 microbial species that, according to all previous research, should have been incompatible. Yet there they were, finding unexpected ways to coexist, adapting to each other's presence in real time. Behind her, the coffee synthesizer hummed to life, producing, for the first time in months, a perfectly brewed cup without complaint or malfunction. S7 noted the anomaly but offered no explanation. Some changes, it seemed, defied easy analysis. As she sipped the unexpectedly perfect coffee and watched her microbes rewrite the rules of symbiosis, Arya reflected on the commander's words. Evolution. Possibility. A new way forward that began with a single act of compassion in a smoke-filled corridor. Outside her viewport, the stars of the Idris system continued their ancient patterns, indifferent to the affairs of the creatures that lived among them. But perhaps those creatures were changing in ways the stars would never comprehend, finding paths beyond predator and prey, beyond conquest and submission, beyond the old doctrines that had defined their existence for millennia. It was a small beginning, born of improvised surgery and desperate circumstances. But as any xenobiologist knew, the most profound changes often began at the smallest scales. Research Station Echo 7 continued its orbit around an unremarkable star in the Idris system. Inside, Dr. Arya Voss bent over her microscope, coffee in hand, watching life find its way forward. Outside, a crimson ship stood guard, testimony to the power of a single act of mercy to reshape the assumptions of a galaxy. The universe would never view compassion quite the same way again. The news traveled quickly through the hegemony territories and beyond. At first, it was dismissed as rumor. The idea that an apex predator commander would declare a life debt to a human scientist seemed preposterous. But as official communiques confirmed the protection order, speculation turned to fascination. Hegemony doctrine had always been clear. Strength commanded respect. Weakness invited conquest. For 3 millennia, this principle had guided their expansion and governance across hundreds of star systems. The idea that mercy, traditionally viewed as the ultimate weakness, could earn the highest form of respect contradicted everything their society was built upon. In the Centauri colonies, the newly appointed governor hesitated before signing orders to increase tribute payments to the hegemony. If they're reconsidering their fundamental doctrines, she argued to her advisors, perhaps we should wait to see how this plays out. At the massive trading hub of Proxima Station, captains and merchants exchanged theories about what this meant for commerce in hegemony-controlled space. Some saw opportunity in the shift. Others feared the destabilization of the established order. 3,000 years they've been the biggest predator in the pond, remarked Captain Singh of the merchant vessel Fortunate Dawn. Now they're questioning their own nature because one human showed compassion? Either this is the beginning of something remarkable, or the prelude to chaos. For her part, Arya struggled to adjust to her new status. Research Station Echo 7 had never received so many visitors. Diplomatic envoys seeking insight into what they were calling the Voss incident. Xenocultural researchers eager to document this evolutionary moment in hegemony society, and even a few hopeful entrepreneurs who believed proximity to the untouchable one might afford them similar protection. Director Okafor handled the diplomatic complexities with admirable patience, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the station's sudden importance in interstellar politics. "I just want to continue my research," Arya complained one evening over dinner with Dr. Martinez. "Instead, I spent 3 hours today explaining to the Rigelian ambassador why I didn't let Commander Thra die, as if letting someone bleed out in front of you is ever the reasonable option." Martinez chuckled. "You've become a symbol, Arya. People project their own hopes and fears onto symbols." "I'm not a symbol," she protested. "I'm a xenobiologist who made a medical decision. There was no grand political statement." "The most powerful statements are often those made without political intent," he observed. "They carry an authenticity that calculated gestures lack." 3 months after Commander Thra's diplomatic visit, Echo 7 detected a distress signal from a small transport vessel at the edge of the Idris system. The ship, registered to a minor trading company from Earth's colonies, reported catastrophic engine failure and requested emergency assistance. "Scans show 4 life signs aboard," reported Chief Engineer Kawasaki. "Their core containment is failing. They have maybe 6 hours before critical failure." Director Okafor frowned. "We're not equipped for deep space rescue. The nearest emergency response vessel is in the Proxima system. They'd never arrive in time." "There is an alternative," S7 interjected. "Commander Thra's vessel remains on station in this system. Their capabilities would be more than adequate for this rescue operation." A strange silence fell over the command center. The hegemony did not perform rescue operations for non-hegemony vessels, except under very specific treaty obligations, none of which applied to a private transport ship. "I'll contact them," Arya said finally. "They might make an exception." The communication was brief and surprisingly straightforward. Commander Thra acknowledged the situation, requested the transport's coordinates, and simply stated, "We will retrieve them." 3 hours later, the Crimson Hegemony cruiser returned to Echo 7's vicinity, with the damaged transport secured in its auxiliary bay. The 4 crew members, shaken but unharmed, were transferred to the station for medical evaluation, while hegemony engineers assessed whether their vessel could be salvaged. They didn't even ask for compensation. The transport's captain told Arya in disbelief, "They just helped us. Said it was at your request." "I merely informed them of your situation," Arya clarified. "Well, whatever you did. Thank you. Everyone knows hegemony ships don't do rescue missions for humans, unless there's some treaty obligation." The captain shook her head in wonder. Maybe the universe is changing after all. It was a small incident, barely noted in official communications, but it represented another crack in the monolithic doctrine that had defined hegemony interactions for millennia. A predator species choosing to protect rather than exploit vulnerability, not out of treaty obligation, but as an extension of a personal debt. 2 years after the original incident, Arya received a formal invitation to present her research at the Galactic Scientific Congress on Earth. It would be her first time leaving Echo 7 since the protection order was issued. The question of whether that protection would extend beyond the Idris system remained theoretical until now. "I can't simply not travel because of this situation," she told Director Okafor. My research is important. No one is suggesting you shouldn't go, Okafor replied. But the diplomatic implications are complex. Your protection order has never been tested over interstellar distances. The solution came, unexpectedly, from Commander Thra himself. When informed of Arya's planned journey, he responded with a formal communique. The hegemony vessel Indomitable will provide escort to Earth. This will ensure all parties understand that Dr. Voss's protected status is not limited by spatial boundaries. And so, for the first time in recorded history, a human civilian transport received a formal military escort from a hegemony cruiser, not as a prisoner or under duress, but as an honored protectee. The sight of the massive Crimson warship accompanying the modest research vessel created a sensation throughout the systems they traversed. By the time they reached Earth, the story had grown to mythic proportions. News outlets reported breathlessly on the woman who tamed the hegemony, a characterization that made Arya cringe whenever she heard it. The scientific conference, originally focused on advances in xenobiology, became secondary to the cultural and diplomatic implications of her arrival with a hegemony honor guard. "This is ridiculous," she complained to Martinez, who had accompanied her to present their joint research. "I'm being treated like some kind of diplomat rather than a scientist. 3 different governmental representatives have asked me to put in a good word with the hegemony." "You've become a bridge between worlds," he observed. "Not many humans can claim that distinction." "I didn't ask to be a bridge," she muttered. "The most important bridges are rarely planned," he replied with philosophical calm. "They arise from necessity and opportunity." The scientific conference proceeded despite the media frenzy. Arya presented her research on microbial communication across species boundaries, work that suddenly seemed like a metaphor for her own unexpected role in interspecies relations. On the final day of the conference, she received a message that Commander Thra requested her presence aboard the Indomitable for a matter of significance. Curious and slightly apprehensive, she agreed to the meeting. The interior of the hegemony vessel was austere, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The lighting, calibrated for Thraxian optical receptors, cast everything in a greenish hue that made Arya slightly nauseated. But she was led with formal courtesy to what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, where Commander Thra waited along with several other high-ranking hegemony officers. "Dr. Voss," the commander greeted her, "your research presentation was illuminating." "You watched it?" she asked, surprised. "Knowledge is advantage," he replied simply. "But that is not why I requested your presence. The Council of Seven has reached a decision regarding the precedent created by our interaction." Arya felt a surge of anxiety. Had the protection order been revoked? Was this elaborate escort merely a prelude to its withdrawal? "The Council has determined," Thra continued, "that the recognition of life debts to non-hegemony individuals does not contradict our fundamental doctrines, but rather expands them. Strength manifests in diverse forms. The capacity to preserve life, even against overwhelming limitations, is one such form." He gestured to a display screen where a new hegemony directive appeared, the formal language nearly incomprehensible to Arya, with its references to ancient traditions and complex hierarchical structures. But the essence was clear enough. The practice of recognizing life debts across species boundaries was now officially sanctioned. "Your actions created a theoretical contradiction in our system," Thra explained. "The Council has resolved this contradiction by elevating mercy from weakness to strength under specific conditions. This is evolution." Arya struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "I'm honored to have played a part in this evolution, Commander, but I'm still just a scientist who did what any decent person would do. Perhaps, Thra acknowledged. That is precisely why it has had such impact. The act was pure, uncalculated, unstrategic. Such purity carries weight beyond political maneuvering. The meeting concluded with a formal exchange of scientific data, a gesture of cooperation that would have been unthinkable before the incident. As Arya prepared to depart, Commander Thra offered one final observation. Your species has long claimed that compassion is strength, he said. For 3 millennia, we have dismissed this as self-deception, the rationalization of a prey species. Perhaps we have been incomplete in our understanding. When Arya returned to Echo 7 6 weeks later, she found the station subtly changed. The repair work from the pirate attack had been completed. But more significantly, the atmosphere had shifted. Where once the scientific outpost had existed in nervous neutrality, now it operated with a quiet confidence born of its unique position. Research collaborations with previously hesitant species had increased threefold. Funding for expanded facilities had been approved without the usual bureaucratic delays. And most tellingly, the standard emergency drills now included protocols for diplomatic incidents alongside the traditional crisis scenarios. We've become a test case, Director Okafor explained during Arya's debriefing. How the hegemony interacts with Echo 7 is being watched as an indicator of broader policy shifts. Every courtesy they extend to us is analyzed for its implications. That's a lot of pressure for a research station, Arya noted with concern. It's also an opportunity, Okafor countered. For 3,000 years, the dominant paradigm in interstellar relations has been predator versus prey, strong versus weak. If that paradigm is evolving, even slightly, we have a responsibility to help shape its direction. In the years that followed, Arya continued her research, publishing groundbreaking papers on cross-species microbial communication that earned her recognition within the scientific community. But her greater legacy, though she was reluctant to acknowledge it, was the subtle shift in how species interacted throughout known space. The hegemony remained the dominant power, still guided by principles of strength and conquest. But within that framework, small changes accumulated. Protection orders similar to Arya's were granted to 11 other individuals from 7 different species. Rescue operations, once performed only under treaty obligation, became more common as commanders invoked the Voss precedent to justify assistance to vulnerable vessels. Perhaps most significantly, the definition of strength within hegemony doctrine expanded to include certain forms of cooperation and preservation that had previously been classified as weakness. It was a glacial shift rather than a revolution, but in a civilization that had remained largely unchanged for 3 millennia. Even glacial movement was remarkable. 5 years after the incident that started it all, Arya stood in her laboratory, watching a new experiment take shape. Through the viewport, she could see the stars of the Idris system, still unremarkable by astronomical standards, but familiar now, almost comforting in their constancy. The coffee synthesizer hummed contentedly in the corner, having long since made peace with its existence. S7's voice emerged from the station's communication system. Dr. Voss, you have a transmission from Hegemony Central Command. Arya raised an eyebrow in surprise. Direct communications from Central Command were rare, usually reserved for matters of significant diplomatic importance. Put it through, S7, she requested, straightening her lab coat out of ingrained habit. The view screen activated to reveal a Thraxian she didn't recognize, older than Thra, judging by the weathered patterns on its exoskeleton, and bearing the elaborate insignia of the Council of Seven itself. Dr. Arya Voss, the elder Thraxian began, the translator rendering its voice with appropriate gravitas. "I am Counselor Karax of the Hegemony High Council. Your presence is requested at the dedication of the Interspecies Medical Academy on Hegemony Prime." Arya blinked in surprise. Hegemony Prime, the central world of the Hegemony Coalition, was rarely visited by non-hegemony species, and never for something as collaborative as an academy. The academy represents a new approach to medical knowledge, the counselor continued, drawing from diverse species techniques and philosophies to create more adaptive healing methodologies. Your unconventional success in treating Commander Thra has been cited as inspiration for this initiative. "I'm honored, Counselor," Arya replied, finding her voice. "But I'm not a medical doctor, just a xenobiologist who improvised under pressure." "Sometimes," the counselor observed, "the most significant advancements begin with improvisation. Your presence would symbolize the spirit of this new endeavor." After the transmission ended, Arya stood motionless for several minutes, processing the implications. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a life had rippled outward, challenging assumptions, shifting policies, and now, perhaps most remarkably, inspiring institutionalized cooperation. She turned back to her microscope, adjusting the focus to observe the interaction between her experimental microbes. They continued their ancient dance of adaptation and survival, oblivious to the larger patterns they helped illuminate. Outside her viewport, a crimson cruiser maintained its vigilant position, no longer strange, but simply part of the station's familiar landscape. Beyond it, the stars continued their patient journey through the cosmos, witnessing the slow evolution of the creatures that lived among them. Research Station Echo 7 orbited an unremarkable star in the Idris system. Inside, Dr. Arya Voss bent over her microscope, watching life find new ways to thrive. And throughout known space, the boundaries between predator and prey, strength and weakness, conquest and compassion grew just a little less certain with each passing day. All because she had saved a dying predator, and in doing so, changed how an entire civilization understood itself. The universe would never be quite the same again.